We're back on BTN TV from the Business Travel Show Europe. I'm Elizabeth West, editorial director of the BTN Group, and I am here with Katie from Festive Road. Katie, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. Great to be here.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the traveler experience. This is another kind of overarching trend in our industry that I've seen growing in importance, and I expect to be a pretty hot topic of conversation during the Business Travel Show. So I wanted to ask you, I know you've mentioned to me that the demand for a better or more integrated traveler experience has been something that your clients have been asking you about. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how that demand has grown or how that awareness has grown?
Yep, absolutely. So I think what we've seen in terms of the demand for traveler experience has shifted coming out of the pandemic for a few reasons. I think organizations were definitely thinking, how can we look at travel differently and from a better, viewpoint and landscape? I think you've had different requirements or requests from the travelers themselves, and this ties, of course, into all the employee engagement and how people want to work. And that is all now starting to result in a lot of our clients coming and saying they want to look at the full end-to-end experience of the travelers. So it's not just about, how is the booking experience, but it is all the way from when they even think about, I need to take a trip. How do I plan, book? How do I prepare? What's it like on trip? And then the return portion as well. So we've been seeing organizations, look at that full trip experience in much more detail.
So that whole life cycle of the business travel, of the business trip, I should say.
Yes.
So when you say business travel experience, so are we talking about technology? Are we talking about the suppliers that are sourced? It feels like a full package.
Right.
Is that where we are? And so then when your clients come to you and say traveler experience, it's sort of everything.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, not surprising from our standpoint, we, take them back and say, well, what is the purpose of travel within the organization? Do you know that as your core foundation? Because based on that can help guide you then in terms of what do you want the experience to look like. It gets more complex because it can differ by traveler, of course. It can differ depending on whether, they're going on a trip to meet colleagues versus if it's to attend a conference. So it's, I think really listening to the travelers. And what's great is we've seen a lot of travel managers doing more listening directly with their travelers and interviewing them and having feedback sessions and forums. We did some research at Festive Road specifically on the TMC partnership, and we asked travel managers, what are some expectations versus reality? And it was funny because experience was one of the biggest expectations from a TMC. But when we started to ask about that, we said, well, is it really all dependent on that one supplier versus however many other suppliers are involved, the technology you're using? So what we often see is this look at what information is needed by a traveler, and then how can you deliver that in the right channel and at the right time? And therefore, is that, dependent upon a certain supplier, or is new technology enabling that as well? So I think there's definitely those different elements, as well as obviously, the traveler well-being is coming into play more often, and people considering not just physical health, but also mental health and how they support the travelers with that along the journey.
Yeah. And, when I think of the traveler experience, and I know that we also did our own BTN surveys and research on this as well. And for me, when I look at, how to deliver on the experience, it very much is embedded in the technology structures that are being used in the program. And how we're leveraging technology to understand the traveler and then to deliver that information or that content that they need. And so I do think it's a really complex question, and technology is going to be a big part of that answer. Can
Right.
you speak to that at all?
Yeah. So, 2 points you hit on. I think knowing the traveler, and that's where you see things like AI, machine
Hmm.
learning, better profiles, all of that coming into play. And how do you then feed that information out to the right suppliers or people that need that to
Hmm.
improve the experience? And then the other bit is, as I mentioned briefly, but how do you use technology to better communicate? And I think that's been kind of a new skill or shift that many travel managers have had to adopt, is really now a much more robust communication plan, because a big part of the experience is definitely setting the expectations, which have certainly shifted a bit, in kind of this newer world of travel. And so I think they're looking at, how do I utilize technology
Hmm.
from a communications standpoint as well.
Yeah. I'm going to speak to the camera for 1 second, because I do think there are a lot of providers at the business travel show
Yeah.
today that are really focused on traveler experience. And maybe overlays in the booking tool to offer more communication,
Yes.
or bringing more data into the pathways that travelers are working through in the technology to make their decisions. And I think those developments are so interesting in our industry right now. What
Yeah.
excites you about what is coming to the table?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot more of these microservices,
Mm-hmm.
as they've been termed,
Right.
in terms of people that are specifically focused on one area, as you said, overlay of a booking tool or something that is on trip, surfacing more information about your on trip experience, or trying to connect the dots of
Mm-hmm.
of your trip as well. So I think we are excited that there are now more options
Mm-hmm.
for a travel manager to really look at their program, to understand their travelers, and then to assess the market and think about what are the right players to utilize. And it's making it easier, especially because of the growth of APIs, to connect
Yeah.
these different travelers.
Great. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Katie, for joining me this morning. I think there's a lot packed into that conversation, and those things will play out over the course of the business travel show. So if you're here, you should seek out the solutions that are going to be really adding value to that traveler experience. So thank you, Katie, for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.